I want to turn the podium over to Dr. Routt Reigart, who is a pediatrician by training, a pediatrician during the day and an activist at night. He is the chair of the board of Beyond Pesticides and has a long history of advocating for children's health. Started his work in working on lead issues and sees a lot of similarities between getting lead out of our society and getting pesticides out of our society. He served as chair of the Children's Environmental Health Board for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and I think it's fair to say is the father of the children's environmental health movement in the United States, or at least the co-father. So Routt, come on up here and take over. Thanks.
I'm going to really be very strict with the schedule for this because we've really got to get done, and so it is going to be on schedule, and then there'll be this very nice session this right after this. Yeah, and I'm still Routt Reigart as I was last night. And I actually can remember following that DDT truck as a young person, and I'm probably one of the few people here old enough to know how to chase that truck. So I was asked to talk about health and pesticides in 10 minutes. And I have now 9 minutes left. So obviously that's not possible. We would love to spend about 60 hours with you going over all we know. So I decided to hit a couple of big principles, a long, very rapidly reviewed list of conclusions, in hopes that you'd have lots of good questions, those of you that wanted to stay for the science panel right after this. So I'm going to be as strict with myself as others. This is a guy, a really neat guy, Philippus Aurelius Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, who lived between 1493 and 1541. He's often goes by the name of Paracelsus, and he's been misused. The conclusion from the German phrase here that the dose makes the poison has been very much misused because it's been interpreted to say a little bit is good, but a lot is bad, and that therefore, for any given agent, we can choose an amount that's small enough to not be poisonous, and that's all of our regulatory processes are based on that, and we'll try to impress those of you who aren't already impressed with it that that's not necessarily an appropriate approach to regulating chemicals, including pesticides. But this, you'll hear this over and over again from regulators, folks from the industry. They'll say, I just got to get the right dose. And I should say right off the bat that we've known for a long time that that's not true. And way back in the 30s, I believe it was, the Delaney clause for cancer said one dose, one shot of a carcinogen could cause cancer, and each dose above that increased the risk. So, in fact, in that case, it wasn't the dose that made the poison, it was the number of exposures. What he actually said, and my German accent's terrible, so I won't say it in German, but basically he said everything is poisonous and nothing is without the ability to be a poison. The only thing that matters is the dose. And he really didn't say high dose is bad and low dose is good. He just said you got to figure out what dose is poisonous, and it might be a low dose, it might be a high dose, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Let's see. This is something that actually resonates with me. This is from a song that was first recorded, and I have the vinyl still, I think, in 1964, from a song called Talking World War II Blues. It says, I'll let you be in my dreams if I can be in yours. I said that. Great. You know, we all feel the same way. We all have dreams, and I have my dreams and you have yours, but let's be together with them. I said this. Back in 1992, I wrote to the administrator of EPA and said, you know, everybody agrees that children are not small adults, but the important thing for me is they're not also large rats. They're biologically different, and just testing in rats really didn't give us the answer that we needed to protect children. So I said that, and I've been quoted on that over the years because I think it's a very important principle that we cannot, in trying to protect children, just rely on dosing a few rats. Just wanted to talk to you about some of the emerging principles that we hopefully can talk about in the next session. And one of the really hot topics today is so-called epigenetics. We used to believe, particularly with regard to cancer, that in order to cause persistent change in a person or a rat, but I'm interested in people, you really need to change the genes. You had to do something to a gene. You had to break a gene, delete a gene, so on and so forth. What we've learned over the last few years is that we can alter the expression of genes without actually causing a mutation or a break or a loss. And the important thing is that these epigenetic events, which include methylation and other things you can do to genes, are probably heritable through several generations. We know that now almost certainly for the old diethylstilbestrol story, or DES, wherein mothers who were exposed to DES during pregnancy, their daughters were highly likely to have genetic malformations and a specific type of female cancer. Well, we've now seen that if you go at least 2 generations out in males, there are male malformations, at least into the 2nd generation, and we're seeing this more and more, that these epigenetic effects can be inherited. There's a reference on here you might want to take down that's looking at epigenetics and environmental health. And for anyone that really wants to know more about it, this is another group that I serve on the board. The Children's Environmental Health Network is actually having a conference at the end of May in San Francisco. That's going to be a 2-day conference that's really looking at the influence of epigenetics in pediatric environmental health. The point is we're just starting to learn about this. We're just starting to develop some of the conclusions with regard to children. I have 3 minutes left. See how tough I'm being on myself? This appeared 2 weeks ago, and this is actually, I think you really should view this as a milestone. This is Linda Birnbaum, who is the director of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, which is one of the NIH institutes. And for the first time, a major administrator of a major government organization has finally acknowledged what we've been saying for 15 or 20 years, that dose response situations can occur wherein very low dosage of toxic materials can cause serious effects, long-lasting effects, and as I said, potentially inherited effects. And there have been a lot of scientists who have been saying this, but for someone in our government to actually say, yeah, it's true, and if you read the editorial, which is in your packet that she wrote, she actually acknowledges that this throws the whole process of risk assessment into a whole new basket and is a major concession on the part of the government and really suggests that we may finally be at what's called the tipping point. Are y'all familiar with the term the tipping point? You finally get it full enough that something's got to happen positive. And this actually, in my view, this editorial by Dr. Birnbaum that was a week or 2 ago, may in fact be the tipping point for acknowledgement that we really need to look at low-dose effects, and we need to look at situations where a chemical or other toxicant may be causing one effect adverse at low dose, a different at high dose. There are all sorts of unusual patterns of exposure. And I should say, I didn't put a slide up for this, but the Pew Environmental Trust at the end of April is actually having a one-day conference on low dose and non-monotonic dose response curves. So this is again an emerging area that's of great interest to all of us involved in protecting children and others. And this is the particular paper that you all want to try to read. It's very long, but many of our friends are up here. Whoops. Theo Colburn, Tyrone Hayes, so on and so forth. These are all people we're very familiar with looking at low dose and non-monotonic dosing. Just want to touch on my great love, which is the development of children. John mentioned it a few minutes ago. It's a very complex process, the rapid growth and development of the brain. Punchline, as you can see from his slide, is the brain's about as big as it's going to be when you're 6 years old, but before that, lots of things happen. And for those of you over the age of 18, you're on your way down. The brain is functioning at its very best when you're 18 years old, which is about the time Mozart wrote most of his best music and so forth. So after 18, you're just struggling to hold on to the brilliance you had. There are these processes. There's morphogenesis, growth of the brain, synaptogenesis, which is connections in the brain, synaptic pruning we'll touch on in a minute, and then the cells that aren't doing what they're supposed to do actually die in a very programmed fashion. And finally, the coating of nerve cells or myelinization really goes on to your mid to late teens. There's just one slide on this process of synaptogenesis, which is a connection between cells that's very active very early in life, and is a process that has been shown to be damaged by chemicals and by lead and by other toxicants. And this is your synaptogenesis process. This is what your brain connections look like at birth. Is there light on here? This is what they look like when you're 6 months old. This is what they look like when you're 2 years old. Important thing is that 2 years old is as connected as your brain is ever going to be, okay? And after that, you start having less connections, and the useful connections persist. The less useful ones go away. Now, anyone who has ever seen a 2-year-old now understands what the terrible twos are about. Their brain is connected in so many ways, they just can't control it. And so they act in crazy ways. And as we get older and mature, the brain becomes more logical, and we lose the bad synapses, hopefully, and keep the good ones. But we also know that certain toxicants actually can inhibit this process of synaptogenesis. So at age 2, you can't do that process as well because you don't have as many to work with. Now, I'm going to take, I'm already 2 minutes over. I'm going to take 1 minute. I was actually asked to talk about this book that I edited for the Environmental Protection Agency called Recognition and Management of Pesticide Poisonings. I did the 5th edition with my colleague Jimmy Roberts, and we completed it. It was published in 1999. It's available free from EPA. We've been fighting with them for a long time to be allowed to update it, and we're finally in that process and have been working on it for the last 2 years. A concession that we were not able to get the last time that we got this time is we were finally allowed to talk about chronic effects of chemicals and pesticides and not just acute poisonings. And EPA is very nervous about it. The book is complete. They've approved every chapter except the chronic effect chapter. No surprise, right? And what I did is I made a little list of the topics that we covered in that. I'm going to go through it in about 30 seconds, but if you want to stay around later, we can talk about them. So this is recognition, the 6th edition, chronic effects. We talked about neurologic and neurodevelopmental effects in adults and children, what happens after acute poisonings that persist. We talked about in great detail organophosphates and organochlorines, And some of the effects that we evaluate are attention deficit disorder, autism spectrum disorder in children, and Parkinson's disease in adults. It's not an inclusive list, but these are some of the high points. We talked about carcinogenesis, recognizing leukemia and brain tumors in children, some blood cell cancers in adults, including non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, prostate cancer, renal cancer, breast cancer, and so forth, and all the arsenic-related cancers that we've known about for a long time. Endocrine disruptors, we talked about the mechanism, and these are some of the endocrine effects we feel are well established now: precocious puberty, altered lactation in women, breast cancer, female fertility, male semen quality, male malformations. Whoops. Oh, dang. Okay, you're just going to have to do it this way. Trying to do it fast. Altered sexual behavior, interestingly enough, and then thyroid dysfunction. We talked about asthma and pesticides and learned that some chemicals, in fact, do initiate asthma, and and many of them actually, for children who have asthma, they make it worse. And if I can't, I guess that's the end. Okay, real quick, I'm done. We can talk about it more later, okay?